Hello, Dr. Bachman. Thank you for joining us today.
Dr. Flowers, thank you for having me. It's a wonderful opportunity.
Can you start off? We always have everybody do this. Can you start off by telling us a little about how you got into chiropractic, and then more specifically, how you got into Gonstead Chiropractic?
Okay, yeah, absolutely. When I was 17 years old, I was in a traumatic water skiing accident, and I injured my lower back, and I had injured it to the point where I had two disc herniations, one between the fourth and fifth lumbar, and one between the fifth and sacrum. And of course, I was plagued ever since with low back problems and sciatica and that kind of thing. And when I was 20, I guess I was 22 years old, and I had a girlfriend, and I was complaining about my lower back, and she said, "Well, you should just go see my chiropractor. He'll take care of you." And I was embarrassed to say to her that I had never even heard the word chiropractic or a chiropractor. I had no idea what a chiropractor was. And she could have told me, go to my gynecologist. I wouldn't have no idea. So I said, well, yeah, sure. If you think that your chiropractor can help me, I will be more than happy to go. And she gave me his address and phone number, made an appointment. And lo and behold, I had that miracle cure where he got my low back straightened out. And it was fantastic. And it was interesting enough, he was a Gonstead practitioner. His name is Dr. Schultze. He's been retired for a number of years and lives in Hawaii now. But he was my first doctor and happened to be a Gonstead practitioner as well. And so that kind of got me motivated to go to chiropractic school. And I already had an undergraduate degree at Cal State Bakersfield in business administration. And I thought, it'd be a great opportunity to go into chiropractic. So I went to Palmer West in Santa Clara, and Palmer West at the time no longer has a curriculum that we had, but at the time it was a brand new school, and we were quite blessed to have the first 3 quarters of school. We were introduced to a variety of techniques: Gonstead technique, diversified, Blair technique, SOT, a Pettibon technique named after Burl Pettibon. And so we got a good flavor of the various techniques that were popular at the time and well used. And then once you were introduced to those techniques, your first 3 or 4 quarters, then you could major in a technique. And so that's what I did. I majored in Gonstead, starting my second quarter at Palmer West, and went through all the way till I graduated.
Yeah. Like I was telling you before, I hear so many different stories, and a lot of people, it's like they just kind of got lucky and stumbled on Gonstead right at the beginning. Other people had to go down a road before they found it, and it's always interesting how people end up where they end up.
Right.
And I guess we call it providence or whatever, that you just happen to end up with somebody that it kind of determined the course of your life from then on.
Yeah, just the luck of the draw. You just be in the right place, right time. And my first quarter at Palmer West, a couple of upperclassmen approached me, and it changed my life forever. Dr. Ed Cremata and Dr. Mark Lopes. So they've been very influential in the profession, and we've done a lot of work together. We've been very good friends ever since. And they were obviously two Gonstead practitioners, and they were involved in the Gonstead Club. And so they invited me to join the club my first quarter, and I did, and the rest was history. But it was fascinating to be approached by those two individuals, and then to spend the rest of my life to present close friends and confidants in the profession.
Yeah, so let's talk about that some, because part of your, I guess we'll say, legacy is that you've done a lot of scientific research. And so, like the friends you hang out with, you become like the people you hang out with. So you've done a lot of research with those guys on your own. Can you talk a little bit about how you got involved in the science side of chiropractic and you got involved with research like that?
Well, unlike Ed Cremata and Mark Lopes, I had no interest in being involved in research or doing research. I just want to be a practitioner. I just want to take care of patients and have that rapport with patients and so on and so forth. And lo and behold, in 1979, I met Linus Pauling, Nobel Prize laureate in chemistry and in peace. He's got 2 Nobel Prizes. And he was very pro chiropractic, and actually he's very pro non-traditional medicine, I
Mm-hmm.
should say. And when as I was going through school, I had my full spine X-rays I shared with him, and he was fascinated to go through the process of the evaluation that we do as chiropractors, especially Gonstead chiropractors with full spine X-ray. And he had never seen a full spine before X-ray, and it was fascinating to him, and it was fun to watch his mind just churn as I'm talking about the biomechanics and the neurological changes, so on and so forth. And then he's at the end of it, he says, this is amazing. He said, can you imagine what kind of chemical reactions that are going on in the body when you give someone an adjustment? And I never thought about that before, and that kind of led on to another thing. And as our relationship developed, I would share with him some of the exciting things that I'd seen in clinic, where a patient would come in with asthma, and it would get them fixed up, and a few adjustments, and get them off all medication, and they'd have a normal life. Bedwetters, I'd fixed bedwetters, fixed a lot of females with painful menstruation, and so I'd share that with him, and he would say, well, that's fantastic that you're getting these kind of clinical results, but what kind of research has been done in this area? And I said, well, very little. And so he said, Trent, he says, if you don't have the research to back up your clinical findings, you just have an interesting cocktail conversation. And that course changed my life as well. And he was very instrumental then on to mentor me through a lot of the articles that I've published in certainly the purple textbook of specific biomechanical that we approach, that Dr. Plogger was the editor of. And so he kind of mentored me through those processes so that we could get me more involved in the research aspect of it. I reluctantly did so, but I've been happy that we made the contribution. I was talking to a few people that I co-authored a lot of these articles with here recently, and I said, I really haven't done that much in terms of my contribution to chiropractic. And they said, really? He said, if you look throughout all the chiropractors in the history of chiropractic, you're probably in the 1% that's done some of the most work. So I said, well, it's a good place to be.
Yeah. What I love about that story is realizing that for a long time, chiropractic research was kind of like, oh, they do research, but it's not real research. And to realize that Linus Pauling, who, as you described to me before, was very meticulous in how he did science. He was very like he really wanted to get details, and he was concerned with getting answers, not just going through the process. And so to realize that he then had an influence on raising the quality and the level of chiropractic research, even if only through you, but then the effect that you then have as a trickle down on other people that you're working with, because he kind of instilled that in. And in that way that Linus Pauling kind of boosted chiropractic research to another level, something he probably doesn't get a lot of credit for, but he did.
Yeah, at the Pauling Institute, or at the Pauling Library up at Arizona State, not Arizona State, Oregon State, the purple textbook is there on display. So the one that we presented to him, and Dr. Plogger wrote the manuscript inside for him. But Linus was very instrumental, and it's a lot of fun to watch him and his work, because he's been dubbed the father of chemical what's the word I want to use, quantum chemistry. He's been dubbed the father of quantum chemistry. And we would talk about chemistry, and he'd say, well, Trent, how deep do you want me to go? Because the guy was infinite. And I'd say, well, just speak English to me and I'll catch on, So he would laugh and we'd go through. And several times I was with him at the Pauling Institute when he was preparing for his lectures. And he had like a blackboard that was probably at least 50 feet long. And he would be writing out all these chemical equations and mathematical uh, equations and so on and so forth. And he'd fill up that board left to right. And he goes, I said, well, what are you getting ready for? And he goes, well, this is a presentation I'm getting ready for. I'm gonna speak to the Denver American Medical Society chapter. And I said, oh, okay. And I said, well, where's your notes? He goes, these are my notes. I go, that's your lecture. And he goes, yeah, that's my lecture. And it just all came from his mind. He was just a fascinating character. Fascinating.
Yeah, I hope we haven't reached the point in American science where people don't know who Linus Pauling is. I worry about that sometimes because, like I told you before, I knew who he was as a high school student because of his vitamin C research, which I thought was incredible. And I guess for me as a kid, realizing that science could be profound and simple, like the fact that for vitamin C, he looked at one of the things he did among many was he looked at what animals did not produce their own vitamin C. So, of course, you've got rhesus monkeys and fruit bats. And then he looked at how much vitamin C they consume relative to body weight. And he went, wow, we probably should be taking a lot more vitamin C. And that kind of like became the impetus. But realizing that that's such a simple, easy way to try to figure it out that I was lucky enough to have a physics teacher who went to Caltech. And while he's not as famous as Linus Pauling, he was brilliant in his own way. And just that was the same lesson I got from him is the brilliance of simple thinking. Sometimes is where the real key lies.
Right. Yeah, it was amazing. His vitamin C, he was so devoted to it. And I remember when he was in his early 80s, he had called me and he said, Trent, of all things, he said, I've been diagnosed with prostate cancer. And I said, well, what are you going to do? And he goes, well, I'm going to, my treatment regime, my supplement treatment regime that I do every day. And so he said, I'm going to increase my treatment regime. And he said, I'm going to increase my vitamin C intake to bowel tolerance. And at the time, I want to say he was probably taking about 4 grams of C a day as a maintenance routine. And he got up to 28 grams of C a day, which was a tremendous amount. And we were talking a couple of years later, and he says, Trent, he says, I got great news. And I said, what? And he says, all my labs are normal with my prostate. He said, everything's checked out. He says, he wouldn't say it was cured. He said, definitely in remission because he said everything is normal. And he went that way for the next 12, 15 years. It finally came back and killed him. But, just the nutritional aspect is what he relied on. And that served him very well, for that condition.
Well, I got to tell you this story. I had a patient. She was from a small mining town outside of Ridgecrest, so you might actually know it because you're from Cook County. She's from Johannesburg. Johannesburg and Randsburg are two little mining towns. Anyway, she came to me, and when I met her, she was probably already in her 60s, I would say, and I saw her through to her 70s. She told me that when she was probably in her late 20s, early 30s, it was her, and she was a single mom with 1 kid, and she got sick and went to the doctor, and the doctor said, you've got cancer. I can't remember which kind. I think it was like bowel cancer or something. You got cancer. You need to do all these treatments. And she said, I have no insurance. I can't afford it. It's not a possibility for me. I'm just going to go home and die. So she said she's walking out the door to go home and die. The doctor came back out and he says, okay, if you're going to go home and die, at least do this for me. And he gave her a prescription for high dose vitamin C, told her how much to take and how regularly to take it. And then as she's telling me the story, she just kind of smiled. She goes, I'm still here telling you the story. She said, that was like 40 years ago. And she said, wow. I took vitamin C and it solved it. And in my head, I thought, Linus Pauling. So it was pretty funny. So that was not actually that long ago when she finally told me that story. It was like maybe just a few years ago now that she told me that story. But it made me realize that. I thought, you know what? And she said, if you ever get cancer and don't know what else to do, at least do that because it worked for me. And I was like, makes sense.
Right. Yeah, my general practitioner is MD naturopath, and he and Linus were good friends as well, and Linus influenced his practice tremendously. So that's who I go to. We talk about Linus all the time, but he's a naturopath. We do all natural stuff. Yeah, it's really neat.
Yeah. So I'm not really totally sure what the timeline was here. So were you doing research as you were still a student in school, or were you in private practice for a while before you went back into research?
No, I was in private practice, and a lot of the research that I co-authored with, I was teaching at Life West in Hayward, and so I worked with Dr. Skip Lance or Dr. Greg Plogger or Ed Cremata or Dr. Cremata or Dr. Lopes, and we would co-author papers together. But it was when I was teaching, but it was certainly practicing. I was only teaching part time, but it was when I was well into practice, and and again it was Linus's influence. I kept saying, well, if you keep coming to me with these great cases, how come you're not writing them up? And so I go, well, how should I start? And he said, well, if you write up as a case study, that leads into an observational study, that leads into a controlled study, and it just escalates. And so I said, okay, so that's a good place to start. So that's what I did. I did a lot of case study publication.
I think that's an important point because that comes up with GCSS all the time, the need for case studies. And I think a lot of people don't write them up because they don't actually understand the flow you just said of it may not be the be all end all, but it gets the ball rolling and it starts the process. And when you've got several case studies that are all on the same topic showing the same result, it brings on the next level of study after that.
Correct. And with with and once you get them published, I'd have the abstract and the cover of the journal of JMPT or whoever did the journal, and I would have them framed and have them in the waiting room. And so the patients come in, they go, "Oh my God, you treat asthma, you treat this or that, disorder." And I go, "Yeah." And they go, "Well, I thought you were just a back doctor. I thought you just treat low back pain or neck pain." I said, "No, that's the sideline, for what I do." The amazing thing was I had a patient. She was the head of Ohlone College respiratory therapy, and it was a renowned respiratory therapy program at Ohlone College was renowned. You graduated from there. You went to work anywhere you wanted to, and I'd written up a case study on asthma that I had treated. I treated dozens and dozens of asthma patients. They all did very well. And so she was in the office one day, and I'd given her the article to read, and she came back and she said, Trent, she said it's a very interesting article, but she goes, by the life of me, I don't understand how chiropractic could reverse the conditions of asthma. And I said, well, Carol, of all people, I would think that you would know better than anyone. I mean, you're in charge of the program. And I walked over to the neurology uh, um, table I had, and I said, "Look at that the branchial tree is smooth muscle layer, and here's an innervation to it." And she dropped her head and put her hands on her head, and she shook her head and she sat up and she said, "Trent, I am so embarrassed." She says, "I get it." She goes, "You're exactly right. It's all associated with the neurological function of the branchial tree." And she says, "I have to tell you," she says, "I am so embarrassed because in the respiratory therapy department program, all we think about is what drug we need to give the patient to manage their asthma. And here you are correcting their physical problem to where they don't have asthma." I go, "Yeah, exactly."
Mm-hmm.
So revelations all around.
Yeah,
And
and
again,
it's
it was Linus's influence for me to write up a case study of those types, and then how it snowballs.
yeah, and it's true that it's like different compartments of the brain. They're so determined to save this patient's life right now that you forget to go back and undo whatever problem led to the catastrophe in the first place. And
Correct.
so there's a part of me that gets that because it's hard to be of split mind and doing multiple things at the same time. And so, like I was just telling my wife this morning, we were talking about what were we talking about? We were talking about somebody. Oh, somebody she knows that she was telling me their case. Do you think you could help him? And so I told her about a case that I had with. He was actually a police officer who was involved in a head-on collision. Um, when I first saw him, I imitated his walk for her and showed her how it was kind of gallopy and kind of caught. He had when he showed me the pictures of himself in the hospital bed, I almost threw up, and I have a pretty strong stomach, and I was like, wow. You can't surprise people with that. That's pretty gross. It was really, really bad accident, but he wanted me to understand the severity of it. what I saw was they were, and this is what I told him. I said they were so preoccupied with saving your life, they were less concerned with whether or not you'd walk again, which is not outrageous. Like that makes sense. If you're not alive, it doesn't matter if you can walk. So
Right.
that's what they were doing. I said, but now you're in this phase where you're up and moving around and you're trying to get your life back, but you can't walk and nobody's figuring it out. Anyway, I adjusted him over a course of like 2 months, and he was able to certify for being a motorcycle cop again, and he got everything back that he wanted. And so it all worked out. But he didn't understand why chiropractic helped him then when all this best medicine could not. And I said, sometimes it's just a matter of focus. That's not what they're focused on. They want to keep you alive. And that's pretty much it.
Yeah, and the thing that, in regards to that interesting story, is that any chiropractor that's been in chiropractic for 20 years, 30 years, they're used to what we call, quote unquote, the miracle cases.
Mm-hmm.
And we get almost used to it. Where that gentleman there, he experienced a profound change of life.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, through chiropractic, and that will stay with him forever. And that's a fantastic part about being a chiropractor.
Yeah, and almost like in the way Linus Pauling was thinking, I was kind of thinking, what other changes under the surface are happening where your chemistry is working better and you're producing better chemicals that we didn't even know were wrong and we'll never even know if they were made right. But just the fact that you're on a higher plane and functioning better, all that stuff comes into it. So I know that in practice, we have that happen all the time where we're helping people with things we don't even know they have wrong, and we'll never know we made it right. We just know that the body works better when it works better.
Right. Right. Everything comes together.
So let's talk a little more about some other cases you've had, and like we were talking about before, so kind of the tie-in between seeing it in practice and knowing you get the result versus going into the laboratory. And I know sometimes when you do a study, sometimes you find out that what you thought you knew, you didn't really know, but in the meantime, you learned something else you didn't expect to learn. And so sometimes as you get into the lab, things kind of change a little bit.
Right. Right. I know that with females that have painful menstruation, I have had opportunity to treat dozens and dozens of women that have had dysmenorrhea, painful menstruation, and it came down through research. It came down to two different mechanisms. One was mechanical, and one was chemical. And the mechanical was what we learned through Dr. Gonstead's work and doing it in the Gonstead technique, was that if you have a pelvis misalignment, it would change the ligament structure across the broad ligament and the round ligament across the uterus and cause a constriction, and that would cause painful menstruation from a mechanical point of view. But when I was teaching at Life West, Patricia Brenner, PhD out of Northwestern, she actually did a chiropractic study on dysmenorrhea, and she had discovered, which I thought was fascinating, the hormonal changes that take place that not only cause dysmenorrhea, but how it was corrected by chiropractic. So what she found in her research was that the ovarian hormone would not shut off in a sequential manner, and the ovarian hormone would continue to irritate the uterus, the muscle of the uterus, almost like a spasmy kind of a reaction. And what she found is that when a chiropractor adjusted or corrected a spinal subluxation in the lower thoracic upper lumbar area, it had an instantaneous effect on the ovarian hormone levels and shut them off and ceased the irritation to the uterus, and the menstruation stopped immediately. So and sometimes when I was treating patients, I'd always tell the female, I said, well, it might take us a cycle or two to get everything lined up if it's the chemical causation. But I said once we get that balance between the ovarian hormone and the uterine hormone, I said you'll be in good shape. And I tell you, I had a lot of success and a lot of happy women out of it.
I have kind of an odd question. You may not know the answer to this, but do you suppose then, I just thought of this, do you suppose that there's probably a corollary then with that area also in men doing something similar? We just don't notice it because we don't have a dramatic cycle and we don't have dramatic dysmenorrhea, but still something that would affect, I don't even know, like maybe on a smaller level, cause some pains, maybe affect hormone production, maybe, I don't know, something that's like almost subclinical because we don't have that dramatic change.
I would think that there would certainly be a corollary with maybe the prostate
But
this,
yeah,
function. I'm sure that there's a corollary there. I haven't looked at the research. I haven't looked, but I certainly could see that there'd be a correlation there.
well, because I'm thinking that prostate cancer is one of the most common male cancers. How long does a dysfunction have to exist before it becomes a cancer? So I don't know.
It could be silent. It could be silent for decades, and all of a sudden pop up, as a surprise. Decades
Yeah,
later. You just
yeah,
never
this
know.
is an odd one. Uh, what other kinds of things have you seen? I guess research wise that made you rethink? Because I know a lot of times part of the problem with Gonstead, I shouldn't say problem, but one of the difficulties with Gonstead is that we live in these two worlds. When on one hand we're trying to make it really simple, and then on the other hand we go and we make it really complex, and then we make it simple again. And so it's like, where do you really live, in the simple or in the complex? And so you can't make it too simple, but you can't make it too complex.
Exactly. Um, one of the cases that I wish I would have written up at the time, but I didn't. And I don't know why I didn't, because it was profound. I had a patient come in. He was about 24, 25 years old, 6 foot tall, big strapping young man, great shape, and he came in with a low back problem. And I noticed that his arm was flexed to where his fingers could touch his shoulder, but he couldn't extend it. He couldn't open his arm in extension. And he had a little bit of movement, maybe 5 degrees, but that was it. And I was doing the history on him, and good address his low back problem, but as a Gonstead practitioner, we're looking from head to toe. And I asked him, I said, well, what's going on with your arm? And he said, I was a traumatic birth. He was birthed at Kaiser Hospital in Hayward, California. And I said, a traumatic birth. He goes, yeah. He said, I've been like this since birth. I said, oh my God. I said, well, what, are you seeing a medical doctor for this, or what's going on? He goes, I have a life. He said, there was a big lawsuit. My parents sued the hospital. I have lifetime medical. I see a neurologist every 3 months on a regular basis, or as needed for the rest. And I said, for the rest of your life? He goes, yeah. I go, what are they doing for you? He goes, they give me things for inflammation, or they give me a little painkiller once in a while, but that's about it. I said, that's all? Yeah. So when I did the full spine X-ray on him, Gonstead approach, of course, I want to look at the whole body and not just the low back, what he came in for. I noticed that his sixth or seventh cervical, it takes me back a while, was severely rotated and subluxated on the film. And I noticed when I zoomed my physical on him that the back of his neck, from one side to the other across his neck, was a scar. And it was a scar, not a surgical scar, but a scar like these bodybuilders get when they bulk up too quickly, and they'll get the tissue, their skin
Mm-hmm.
tissue tears, and they get the scarring.
Yeah.
It looked just like that. And I go ask him. I said, "What's this scar from?" He goes, "Well, that's from my birth." I said, "Holy smokes!" Anyway, I started working on him. I worked on his low back, but I worked on his neck. And within 2 months, he had full extension and full use of his arm for the first time in his entire life. And he goes, "Oh, this is going to be exciting," because he said, "I have an appointment with a regular scheduled appointment with my neurologist next month." I go, well, I like to see how that goes.
Yeah.
So he he had full function after 2 months, and it was so exciting. So anyway, he was getting ready. He came in the day before his for treatment. The day before he was going to see his neurologist on a regular schedule. And I said, I want all the details. I want to know what happens at this appointment you go to tomorrow. And he said, okay. He came in the next week. He said, you won't believe it. And I go, what happened? He said, they put me in a gown. They put me in the room like they always do in the exam room. And the doctor walks in and just says hi to me as he walks straight to his desk with his back turned to me. And he starts writing the notes in his notes. And so he said, my patient said, well, I went to a chiropractor. And he said, without even turning around, the medical doctor said, well, that was a waste of time and a waste of money. Didn't even ask, what'd you go see a chiropractor for or anything else. And so he goes, well, he said, an interesting thing happened. And he goes, well, what happened? And he said, well, let me show you. He said, the medical doctor turned around and he extended his arm for the first time in his life in front of this medical doctor. And the doctor folded up his notes. And as he's walking out the room, he says, I knew you'd grow out of it. And he came back and I said, he actually said that? And he said, yes. And I said, I can't believe it. That's unbelievable. Comment. Didn't even ask about who the chiropractor was or what the treatment was all. No, didn't ask a thing. Just turned around and walked out. And I thought, man, how sad. That's a state of medicine. That's really sad.
Mm-hmm.
But he had a profound effect through chiropractic and changed his life forever for what they thought was going to be a permanent problem.
Yeah. Maybe I'm just a quizzitive person, but I can't understand if you see something that defies your paradigm. I can't understand not wanting to know more. But I guess there's a lot of people that like, no, my paradigm is everything. Don't go messing with it. It's just the way it is.
Well, I later found out, much later, I found out that if a medical doctor ask any question, they don't ask any questions because they got to put it in their notes. Hmm. They have to put that information into the patient's file, and they don't want to give credit to anybody else but themselves, and they don't want to recognize any other treatment protocol other than what their guidelines call for, and so it's a sticky situation. But I'm glad I became a chiropractor and not a medical doctor. That's for sure.
All right, let's shift gears just a little bit. And let's talk about scoliosis. I know you've been involved with studies on that. You've seen it in your office. So can you kind of give us a little bit of a tie-in between clinical results versus studies and what they show regarding scoliosis?
Well, the scoliosis, at Life West, we had a grant, and it was a 3-year study, and it was pediatric idiopathic scoliosis. In other words, there was the children that had no particular medical cause for their scoliosis. And so I did the treating. I was a treating doctor and got some fairly good results. And the interesting thing is that there was another treating doctor that was doing diversified, and I was doing Gonstead. And the diversified doctor got no results, and the Gonstead doctor, myself, was getting some good results. So we showed that at least there was a correlation between the Gonstead system and its value in terms of scoliosis correction, and one other technique that didn't have any effect at all. So what that showed me was that what I always known is that how specific the Gonstead system was or is, and in its application, in its correct application. So at the end of the 3-year study, we did it. There was Dr. Lance was the director of research at Life West at the time and the director of the program, and he wrote up the initial research on it and was published. And at the time, it combined the diversified practitioner and myself, and the comparison in the diversified practitioner in Dr. Lance's assessment kind of nullified what I was doing in terms of the progress. So that was in 2001. And so in 2007, I collaborated with Dr. Mike Minke and Dr. Plogger, and we redid it, just taking my data out of the original study, and so we could show that chiropractic was beneficial. The chiropractic treatment was beneficial, and so we got that published in 2007.
Yeah, that's great because that's actually a science illusion that I talk about a lot when you use averages. So that by averaging you two together, it makes you look worse than you are and him look better than he is. And in the end, they go, "Oh, it's about the same." When in reality, what you really found was they were not even close to being the same. And I know
Right.
drug manufacturers do the same kind of thing. If they don't want something to look bad in comparison to something else, they just put the results together, and you make the bad one look better, and you make the good one look worse. And then you go, "Look, they're in the ballpark." And so people have to know there's a little math game that goes on there that if somebody wants to be deceptive, that's how they do it.
Right. Right. So it was, to my knowledge, it was the first of its kind long-term scoliosis study. I don't have any information that's been redone since then, but at least we have at least one long-term study that substantiates Gonstead practitioners to treat with varying success scoliosis patients.
Just out of curiosity, when you did those studies, did you look at any point at like leg length differences and what influence the leg length had, actual deficiency, measured deficiency with the scoliosis?
None at that time, because when we got when Dr. Lance received the grant and wrote it as part of the grant write up, it was very specific how the treatment would be administered. Now, if I was in my office treating a scoliosis patient, my treatment method and approach would be much more extensive than it was in the clinical setting. So in terms of the research that was proposed. So I mean, because we know there's a lot more benefit. There's a lot of benefit with the specific exercises, with maybe heel lifts, with a variety of things. Looking at the neurological as opposed to just the biomechanical implications. So and postural changes due to various postural rehab programs that are available now. So you could be much more extensive with your approach than we were in the clinical setting, or in the research setting, because it had to be very stringent in terms of how the treatment would be administered.
Have you done other scoliosis studies besides that one, or is that the only one you?
That was the only one. It was a 3-year study, and that was enough for me.
Yeah, you're like, I need to see something other than
was,
scoliosis.
yeah. I'll let somebody else take the mantle, because I was at the clinic every week, and so treating these, because I treated these patients at the LifeWest clinic, not my own clinic.
Can you tell everybody a little bit about what you were telling me about the difference between a scoliosis and a kyphoscoliosis as far as how it affects the patient?
Well, when I was doing review of the literature with Dr. Plogger, we were talking about what he observed in the literature was that from a mechanical point of view, there's no physical detriment that had been found with a person with scoliosis, as opposed to as we in chiropractors in practice, we see a lot of people with kyphotic curves and so on and so forth, where they're hunched over, their shoulders are drawn forward, and they're hunched over, and their head's looking towards the ground. And that when you have that hyperkyphosis, like the thoracic spine, he found in the literature that did cause, from a mechanical point of view, did cause encroachment on the heart, the lungs, the respiratory system, the circulatory system, and various other systems that were detrimental to a patient's health. Whereas from just a scoliosis point of view, the curvature of the spine did not reveal that kind of information.
I feel like with scoliosis patients, I probably spend more time verbally interacting with them than most, because I feel like I have to give them more info, mainly because I know that they probably have been told things with greater discrepancy. They've probably been told more false things. They've probably been scared more. So a lot of times with scoliosis, those are the patients who are most looking for answers. They want to know the truth. They want to not be lied to. And so I always feel like I got to give them a lot of information to get rid of some of their fears that may be unfounded, and at the same time trying to direct them in other ways. And so one of the things I always start with is the idea that you don't need to straighten the spine. So people who are coming to you with a treatment plan of, we got to get you straight, or we're going to get you straight, that's not even necessary. That really what we need to do is get you functional. And a functional spine is going to do everything you need it to do. Because I don't know if your study even looked at this, probably not, but the correlation, I'm sure you've seen it clinically, the correlation between dysmenorrhea or something, or amenorrhea, and girls with scoliosis, that I always tell them I'm less concerned about the scoliosis than I am about the amenorrhea. That can pose problems for you down the road. So we want to fix that by getting you a functional spine. And so I really try to focus mostly on explaining to them that we need the spine to function, and here's how we're going to do that. And we're not going to be obsessed with what it looks like. And I often use the example that I tell them, if I could take an x-ray and your spine was straight, but you were still in pain, you'd still have a problem with that. And yet if I showed you an x-ray of a curvy spine and you had no symptoms, you really wouldn't care what it looked like. And they're like, that's pretty much true. Well, that's all we need to know we got to make it work. We don't need to make it look good. It's not a spine contest. So how do you
Yeah,
that?
my direct experience with trying to straighten the spine is when I was a student at Palmer West. One of my instructors, he's since been deceased. I'm not going to mention his name, but he's since been deceased. But his whole approach was straighten the spine, zero it out, make sure the person's straight. Well, I don't have scoliosis, but I got a little curve here and a little curve there because of subluxation and plastic deformity that's developed over the years because of the subluxations. But anyway, so he went about to straighten my spine, and I was 30 or 31 at the time, years of age. And after a couple months of him trying to straighten my spine, I was wetting the bed every night, which I'd never done.
Mm-hmm.
I had massive daily headaches, 24 headaches around the clock, massive headaches. My thoracic spine felt like somebody had shot me in the back with a 50 caliber machine gun bullet. I was in so much pain and so dysfunctional. I finally told him, I says, and I had insurance, so I wasn't doing a freebie. I was paying for this torture. So I said, I can't take it anymore. I'm checking out of this of your care. So he said, well, I'm about ready to give up on you anyway, blah blah. I can't seem to get you straightened out. And I go, no, you straightened me out enough already. So I went back to my to my clinician that was in the clinic at Palmer West. He was a Gonstead practitioner, and it took him about 2 weeks, but he finally got me no more bedwetting, no more massive headaches, no more thoracic pain. It was delightful to get the good Gonstead practitioner working on me again. So that's my limited experience with somebody trying to straighten the spine. Massive physical changes that were for the worst.
Yeah, sometimes I learned more from the bad adjustments I received over time than the good ones. A lot of times, because you get a good adjustment, you're like, I don't know how you did that, but that was awesome. Then the bad ones, you're like, I know exactly what you did, and I think I'm going to die. It's just terrible. So you feel what
the bad ones you never forget.
Yeah, and it totally makes sense too, because there's a whole story about Gonstead was taught to pound down the high spots and to try to put those curves back in, and he found that it never worked. So then he thought, well, if it's not working anyway, I might as well just experiment and see what I can find. So he started hitting them higher and hitting them lower, and what he found with consistency is that he had better results with correcting a curve if he went 2 levels below the apex than if he hit the apex. And I thought, well, that makes total sense. And if the problem is 2 levels below the apex, then it makes perfect sense that the apex is your compensation. So if you actually start yanking out the compensation, all you're doing is putting more weight-bearing pressure on a dysfunctional subluxation. So you would expect the symptoms to get much worse, even to the point of wetting the bed, which nobody wants to create, but happens, I guess.
Nope. Absolutely. Yep. I agree 100%.
So,
and going back to my chiropractic education, is that one of the things, and it was just to be in the right place, right time. is that as a Gonstead practitioner or a student at the time, um, there were a lot of the techniques that were taught at school. They were taught by full-time clinicians that came to the school to teach a class an hour or two here or there during the week. So, which was fantastic because they would bring in their case studies, they'd bring in their personal knowledge of the patients they're treating with that particular technique and be able to share that with us, the students, which was so valuable. That was probably more valuable than any other part of my education, or just as valuable at least. And with the Gonstead method, we were very, very fortunate and blessed to have so many wonderful, renowned field practitioners that were steeped in the Gonstead system that not only taught us in school, but we could take our cases to them in their office and get firsthand experience from them. And shoot, with the combination of the Gonstead practitioners that taught us, they probably had 150 years of combined education or experience that was so valuable and so influential on us as students. And hopefully we carried that forward to the students that we taught, and so on and so forth, in the years that preceded that, our experience as a student. But it was so valuable to be able to sit down with these instructors and clinicians that would share, and we'd review our cases with them, and they'd give us firsthand knowledge of this is what you need to look at. There's some other alternatives you need to address. So it was fantastic.
Yeah, as somebody who didn't go to school in the Bay Area, um, the Bay Area during that period of time, because GCSS started there, you got the benefit of not only having a
Mm-hmm.
nice collection of doctors, but they were all really, really excellent doctors. Like these people started citing
Yes.
names, and I'm like, yes, I've heard of all these people, and most of them were either before my time or right as I was beginning, that they were in their prime. So it it really was a great place to be at a certain point in time. And I don't know if people knew it at that point in time, but looking back in time, it's very clear it was the place to be at that point in time, um, to get that experience, because it's hard when people are giving you clinical knowledge, but you don't even know for sure if it's good clinical knowledge. But these group of guys and ladies too weren't just doing work and then bragging about what they had done. They were bringing it to each other for scrutiny. And they were looking at it going, what else would you think? And I think that for me as a practitioner helped me when I realized that it's not about having one answer, but basically coming up with a diff die of these are my potential
Right.
subluxations. And if the body's not doing what I think it should do, I got to have somewhere else to look to see where's the holdup, and not be like, well, I had one idea, it didn't work, I guess I'm out of luck.
Right. And it was interesting because a lot of these clinicians, you go to, you could take, we'd take as a student, we'd take a case to them, take the x-rays and the history of the patient and what we're doing and so on and so forth. And you could go to one field practitioner and she would give you their advice. And you would go to another field practitioner and there'd be very similar
Mm-hmm.
advice. There'd be some ancillary things that you could look at too on both cases or in both situations, but at least there was consistency. It wasn't like a helter skelter kind of approach. There was consistency, and I think that consistency is the thread that runs through the Gonstead system. That's made it so successful.
Yeah,
It's fantastic.
yeah, I agree. That's in a perfect world, we could all evaluate a patient independently and all come to the same conclusion. The world's not perfect, but
Right,
we'll get in the ballpark. We'll be close.
right, right. Um, and one of the things that getting back to Linus, one of the things that he had said to me is that do you want to read about history or do you want to make history? And again, that whole concept changed my life and my approach to healthcare. And I said, well, I want to make history. And so I have a little interesting story to share about a historical adjustment. So in 1992, Dr. Onrig organized through the Gonstead Clinical Studies Society a pilgrimage down to Sydney, Australia. Sydney, Australia, they wanted to have, there's a group of doctors down there that were involved with the School of Chiropractic at Sydney, and they wanted to have the Gonstead Diplomat program be part. They wouldn't be part of it. And so, in order to do that, Claudia Anrig organized this pilgrimage down there, and it included Dr. Alex Cox from the Mount Horeb and Dr. Stoner from Mount Horeb, and we all went down and put on a fantastic 3 or 4 day seminar, and got these doctors lined up so they could be in the Gonstead Diplomate program. Well, at the time, there was the head of the department head for technique was an osteopathic doctor, and I believe his name was Dr. Devereaux, and his approach to cervical spine. Now, the reason why I say cervical spine is because my seminar commitment down there was to do a seminar cervical spine evaluation and technique and adjustment for a group. And so Dr. Devereaux's approach to his final was that he determined that in the cervical spine you could get 54 different audibles with manipulation of the cervical spine, one at a time, of course. So his final was, how many of those 54 could you demonstrate for me in the final? And the closer you got to 54, the higher your grade got. Well, anyway, so
who was the point of
I was
having
doing
that done to them?
Oh my God, there were so many jacked up necks down there. I couldn't believe it. But anyway, so I was doing my presentation. I was on stage. I was going through my evaluation and technique and so on and so forth, the Gonstead's approach to cervical spine. And I probably had, 75 students there, maybe at least. And Dr. Devereaux was in the audience, and I had never met him before. I didn't know anything about him. And so as I was kind of winding up my presentation, he asked me, he raised his hand. I said, yes. And he said, would you examine my cervical spine? I said, I'd be more than happy to. So he came up on stage and the whole audience got quiet. And I thought, what's going on? Why is everybody so quiet? And so I scoped him, I palpated him, and I said, well, you've got a really bad fifth cervical vertebrae here. And he said, well, would you adjust it for me? I said, I'd be more than happy to. I looked out on the audience, and everybody's mouth was like a gasp. They were like, their jaws were dropping to the floor. And I go, what the heck is going on? Well, unbeknownst to me, Dr. Devereaux, through the osteopathic methods that he'd been treated by, had really caused severe degeneration of his fifth cervical, and he had a pain all the time, and he would never let anybody touch his cervical spine. So I thought it was kind of interesting. He taught the technique at the school, but he wouldn't let anybody treat him. I thought, this is really odd. Well, anyway, so I unbeknownst to me of all the history of this gentleman, I went ahead and I adjusted him. And the Lord was with me that day, because that thing went off like a 12-gauge shotgun shot, and he got instant relief, thank God. And so he announced to the board of directors at the school and the president of the school the week after we left, he says, I see that Gonstead's system is the way to go. And he says, I'm gonna do a transition, and once you have Gonstead as a curriculum, I will step down. And that's exactly what he did. As far as I know, I haven't spoken to anybody in years. As far as I know, the Gonstead system is still being taught as part of the curriculum there at the school, Sydney School of Chiropractic.
Wow,
but that one adjustment changed everybody's life.
Yeah, that's more integrity than most people would have, I think. But so I have to applaud for that. Like, that's a lot of integrity to realize that there's a better way. If I can't do it, somebody else should.
Yes. Yeah, that was a fantastic moment in history. I think it was great.
Yeah, those are the sweaty moments, though, when you got an adjustment that's got all the marbles on the table, and you gotta make it go.
You got to perform. You got to make sure it happens right. And I tell you, all the planets were lined up for me that day. That was great. It was a wonderful opportunity, a wonderful moment.
Yeah. So I'm just kind of wondering, and I don't know, maybe you can't answer this, but I'm curious, based on the current state of chiropractic, current state of research, everything like that, if Linus Pauling was here today, what do you think he would say about chiropractic research, and what would what would be his idea for how to move it forward in the future?
Well, he would definitely be in favor of more research, um, wider, expansive research in the chiropractic field. Now, Linus never had any problem getting funding
That's what I was
for research.
thinking.
Yeah, money was no object to him, and he and I had several conversations about how difficult it was to get chiropractic funding. So I would think that he would really be focused on not only the expanse of the type of research that needs to be done in the chiropractic profession, but also channeling some funding sources through governmental and state and so on and so forth, funding sources to get some really robust research conducted. And I think that would be his biggest contribution to pushing this profession forward to get the validation that we so deserve, and get the answers to our clinical experiences, and correlated with the research, so that we could actually say, this is what happens when I do this, and this is what happens when I do that. In terms of a patient correction. A patient treatment, I should say, not correction.
Yeah, that'd be great.
So I think he'd be very influential in that regard. He certainly gave me some great ideas on things to look at and to keep in mind as I'm treating patients with various conditions, and to monitor any kind of research that might be validate what I'm doing. And if it's not, then certainly keep that in the back of my mind, so we could maybe do some case studies, publish case studies or whatever, to get that correlation between the clinical aspect and the research aspect, which is very important.
Absolutely.
But on the flip side, you got to get practitioners to read the research. I mean, if you get some valuable research out there, you've got to get them motivated to read it, because a lot of these practitioners are getting these great results with their patients, and they go home at night with a big smile on their face, and they think, well, that's life. That's all I need.
That's been one of my biggest beefs lately. I've been pouring through research for numerous different projects, and I found a whole bunch of really cool stuff, and I was like, I don't think anybody's reading the research, because I found all kinds of cool stuff in here. And that's true. It's like, that is kind of the key component, because I forget what it was. There was something I just recently saw not that long ago, and it applied to medicine more than to us. But I said, it's a cool, innovative thing. It would make them better, but they always say it takes about 20 years for the research to find its way into the doctor's office. So reading the research speeds that up.
Yeah, in the chiropractic profession, we're not alone. I mean, medical doctors are in the same boat. I had a good friend, he's passed away now, Norm Shumway. And Norm Shumway was like in big competition to be the #1 cardiovascular surgeon. He was in competition with one of the big names down in South Africa. The gentleman from South Africa was the first one to do the heart transplant, and Norm Shumway, not to be outdone, did the first heart-lung transplant. And Norm did his research and work out of Stanford. And he and I would go round and round, because I would read the medical literature that showed how detrimental open heart surgery was to the patient, and how, in most cases, ineffective. Not only harmful, but ineffective. And I would go round and round with him, and I'd say, Norman, do you read your own research? Why are you even doing this kind of work? But his ego was big as Texas, and he wanted to be the big gun, and he was the big gun in certainly North America when it came to cardiovascular. And so one year he came to me and he goes, okay, I found the panacea to open heart surgery. We're not going to do that. We're going to do stents. We're going to put in stents. And I said, the stents literature says the same thing. It's detrimental to the patient. It doesn't work. So they don't read. And I said, do you ever read your research? He goes, no, I don't have time for that. I'm too busy treating patients. So, the medical profession is the same boat as a chiropractor.
Yep, absolutely.
We just got to get people motivated. That's all.
Well, thank you so much for joining me. This has been great. And I think it's a good combination of history with science with practical application. So thank you for joining me here. I really appreciate it.
It's been a pleasure, and I appreciate the opportunity.
You're welcome. Yeah, I'll definitely have you on again, and we'll talk more.
Sounds good.
Thanks so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.